All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Shrikrishna Upadhyaya, your host for the day, and with me is Sowmya Nandan, my colleague at Takshashila, who will be co-hosting the podcast today with me. Our guest today, Supriya Sankaran, is the co-founder of Agami, and Agami is working to change how justice is delivered in India. As we all know, justice or justice delivery is a function of the state, which is traditionally carried out through the court system. However, almost everyone today agrees that there are some fundamental problems, some crisis in our judicial system, which is ensuring that justice delivery is not taking place in the way it is intended to. However, at Agami, I believe that justice is understood very differently. In fact, Supriya, I wanted to open with asking you about, a broad question as to how you conceptualize and view justice at Agami. Because I was browsing through one of your projects, which is Upadhyaya, which is very interesting, by the way. The idea is to use an AI-powered tool to make quick and brief summary of judgments, of long, verbose judgments. And one of the statements which I came across was that, what if justice worked like magic? So in this context, I want to ask you, Supriya, how is justice viewed at Agami? You also use the phrase justice making. So why do you say justice is made rather than delivered? And welcome to the show. Floor is all yours.
Thanks so much, Shrikrishna. It's really great to be here. And I don't think there could be a better way to start this conversation. It's so interesting that you point out that it's been traditionally, justice has always been seen to be, served by someone to someone. And it's always been something that, if we close our eyes, the first thing we think of is police, a prison system, a court system. That's how just the broader narrative has led to our imagination of how justice can be accessed, right, in some way. But it's interesting, right? When we began Agami also, I'd be lying if I said that may not have been somewhere a part of our own, imagination. But what was really interesting was our own learning over the last 4 years, because we really had the benefit of starting with what we call the Agami Prize, where, we just put it out there to say, let's see who's doing what to innovate for justice, right? So, and we put no boundaries to say who can apply. We didn't say it has to only be the government, and we didn't say it has to only be nonprofit organizations, or, that it can't be from the private sector. And I think when sometimes you just open your eyes to sort of listen and see what surfaces, it challenges a lot of what you have either been raised being told or what you believed somewhere deep down. And what has fascinated us is that it was already being made by a whole host of people who just cared about justice, right? So, and it was an active choice where people like you and me, really not different, but from very, very different corners of the country, saw injustice in some shape or form, and it could be something as small as, okay, you have a right to a PDS system and you haven't got it, or to a pension and you don't know how to go about accessing it, seeing their community members face that. Sometimes it is someone facing a domestic violence issue or an insurance claim, right? You see it all around us, people who are in some way struggling to be able to access their rights, enforce it in some way, and people who sometimes have been actively wronged. And it's been fascinating for us to sort of see that there is such a large community of people who are already making justice. And I use that verb very intentionally because this is active agency and conscious action on their part, right? Where they are saying, okay, we see this happening and what can I do about it? And then once you allow yourself to think that way, right? Once you start thinking that you're not sort of letting go of your agency and saying, oh, there's someone out there who has to do it, and my job is to sort of just go stand in front of them and ensure it happen. But I can sort of look at this problem and say, okay, where are the gaps happening? Either the information gap or the process gap or the platforms for people to be able to access this in a better way. And how do we redesign these systems? You see this sort of happening. I'll give you a couple of examples that will make this really concrete. You take an organization like Ajivika Bureau that's based in Rajasthan, but actually has their work around the country. They work a lot with migrant workers. Very often, they're not paid, migrant workers are not paid their wages, there are delays in payments, they're not paid for overtime, a whole host, sometimes they're wrongfully terminated. These are issues that most migrant workers are not going to be able to go to a lawyer or a police station, file a case like, if you and I were wrongfully terminated, to go file a case, fight it out for the next 10, 15 years. And Ajivika didn't see a limitation in that, right? They were like, okay, this is what the need is of the community is. What can we do? They've developed a call center where migrants can call, talk about their complaints. They let them know what their rights is. Ajivika's team, that is mostly paralegals, that is people not trained in law, people who haven't gone to any law school, but who just have very commonsensical understanding of what your rights are, mediate conversations between them and their employers. They suddenly have the ability to bring, because sometimes you forget that you have the power even as a worker, right? Because you are a force in some way, that you are a collective that can actually have negotiating power. So Ajivika brings, the workers and the employers to the same table, and they mediate these disputes. And they have resolved disputes and helped migrants recover crores of disputes, right? Like crores worth of money back to them. This is an example of justice making. They are making it happen. Is the court involved? No. Is the police involved? Largely no. In exceptional cases, when they're not able to do, a small percentage of the volume of cases go to them. But significantly, it is being made by organizations like Ajivika. And I can name easily at least 300 to 400 more such initiatives in the country, right? And you have initiatives completely on the other spectrum. You might have heard of this organization called Insurance Samadhan, where most of us will take insurance when we actually need it. The companies will sort of throw back some fine print to us saying, no, but this was excluded, so you're only going to get X amount. And we feel very completely disempowered, right? We don't know these fine terms. We never really know how to read it. We don't know precedents of how these things have been interpreted to know actually can this be included or not. And Insurance Samadhan has started using data science, combined technology, data sciences, and in some way just really started playing back to customers how they can navigate these claims, and they help us navigate those conversations in a much more effective way and recover those dues that we need from the insurance company rightfully. So you see, somewhere these kind of ideas and initiatives are shifting power imbalances, demystifying what law is and what it can do for you, allowing you to become an active player in it, right? Like you're no more saying only X amount of people can appropriate this space and sort of anchor in it. And really what has started helping this happen is people just allowing themselves to do so, not sort of reclaiming the space. And to be fair, I have to say, somewhere the more we sort of look at traditional systems of dispute resolution too, like where conflicts have happened or issues have happened, you realize that somewhere society always had this in its fabric. You look at tribal societies, village communities, you've always had elders who sort of play this role in terms of, they use the word madhyasthata of saying mediating, helping two people come to an agreement. And to us, all this comes in the spectrum of justice, right? Because any method that helps you in some way get when there is that sense of injustice, right? And it's so hard to define it because you can't say, oh, this is what justice is. At somewhere it is a feeling that you and I experience when our own inner conscience of what is right and wrong. And for us to find a whole host of pathways, just because there is a law and there is a particular legal process, it doesn't mean that is the only path we can choose. We can carve our own to be able to access justice. So I think what excites us most is being able to reclaim that space and to see more and more people reclaiming the space of justice making. And that just throws up immense opportunity for all of us to play in it.
Hey, Supriya, an extension to that, I think the most privileged communities also find it hard to interpret what the law actually implies, right? So, what's happening more so in the marginalized communities is something that we would like to understand, because we feel it doesn't really percolate down enough to the rural and the remote setups. And the judicial infrastructure as such is not very strong. And there's unawareness, right? And people
Yeah.
are not even sure about the entitlements that we have as citizens. So, what's your experience been on that front, and how have you supported people in ensuring solutions towards this?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really critical question, because so much of justice making becomes even more relevant to people for who the formal system isn't serving, right? So it becomes paramount for everyone, but more for those excluded. And the truth is, I won't go so far as to say that we have seeded these solutions, but I can tell you, I can name a bunch of initiatives that are designed for them, right? So you'll have on one spectrum organizations like Center for Social Justice, that's based in Gujarat, Zenith and Ali, that's based in UP, where all of them sort of work with really marginalized groups on various issues, from land rights to forest rights to these issues of being able to, sometimes it's even issues of active violence against particular communities. And their mechanism of doing it is sometimes having this organization, Center for Social Justice and Ali, have a community of paralegals that they have trained who don't wait. The classic lawyer posture is for you to sort of wait for someone to knock on your door and give you a case, right? When you go visit these organizations, the thing that really opens your eyes, and especially for someone like me who was a lawyer and so used to sort of saying clients need to come to you, these paralegals actively are in the community, seeking out the most remote ones of them, the fisher communities on a remote island, by which you have to go to a boat, going and spending time there, because nobody is going to come to you even if you're physically there with a case, because people don't know their rights and don't even know what is possible in their scenario, right? But these paralegals go spend their time there and then understand what is happening, where are rights being violated, and then when necessary, either mediate with the bureaucracy to be able to provide, sometimes it's no primary healthcare center there, or sometimes the need for ambulance services, to when there is a case of violence, to be able to represent them before a court. So it's almost like they have developed a new capacity within the community, and almost a completely new role for members in the society to bridge this role, right? They've created this new role of a paralegal that didn't exist before, much like what happened with ASHA workers in the healthcare field. You have other groups of folks who are I think what excites me about the work of Zenith so much is that they do some of that, in terms of going to a community, listening to their problem, but they sort of, their posture is much more, we will tell you what your rights are and how you can go about enforcing it. So if you need this information regarding land title, where can you go, how can you go, what is it going to take for you to file a petition, we'll tell you everything. We are just here to support you. So I always say it's like a do-it-yourself kind of a model, where with the most marginalized communities, they are sort of saying, we aren't going to be your lawyers doing it for you. Ye aapka kaam hai, aapko karna hai. And I think it takes a certain audacity to think about it like that, because we're all, again, so trained to think, oh my God, this is technical. And, we really have to train people over the moon to be able to sort of claim these. But they have developed the knack of being able to break this down and sort of say, what are baby steps people can take to start doing this yourself, right? And then you have organizations like Gramvani, which works in many parts of the country, that I think has done a really interesting thing. They've created effectively a two-way social media platform, right? Where, because social media is so much of a push kind of a thing, but that works on a very simple mobile-based IVR system that, you can call, press 1 to hear this, press 2 to hear this kind of thing. And people are mentioning what their problems are. Other people can listen to it and respond to it. And they've developed, again, a kind of a club that's in every area that helps people, again, navigate these. So does this look and feel anything like a lawyer, court, and police system? No, it doesn't. But does it get, to some extent, the same job done in terms of helping enforce help enforce entitlements, and helping people navigate the ways in which they can do so? Yes, they all do, right? So you see these new systems that are evolving, completely new social architectures sometimes, because what excites me about a place like Grandvani is they have these clubs of people, 10, 15 volunteers who sort of help people know there is this place you can call, this is what you can get information from. So they have the social architecture. Many of them are using technology, and in some way creating completely new roles for people to start playing this game. And all obviously towards, helping advance access to justice.
Yeah, thanks, Supriya. So that is very fascinating to hear. And like you put it earlier, also, it's about, the communities and people reclaiming the field in which they operated on, because the state came in much later and set up all these formal institutions, which I believe have failed to deliver. And people are looking at society-driven solutions to the problem. And I think tech and innovation in the recent years has just, made it accessible, made it even more prevalent. But like
I just want to add one thing there, if I can interrupt, because the critical thing for us is to not see this as a binary of this has failed, so this has to come as almost like one to replace the other. There is and will always be a critical role for the state to play, right? And equally there, what I would say the justice making is happening is how people are seeing a role for which they can participate in that process, right? Like can be sometimes as simple as public participation in a policy, and for the movement of more laws to have that kind of a system, right? Like where you're asking for people's opinion and how laws are passed, policies are passed, but also in being able to partner with the police. You see a lot of parts of the country, like communities are partnering with the police stations locally to be able to help the police know the case, file them, do different things. So I think you can have community participation in justice making even in partnership with the state. There will be some things the state is not going to be the best position to solve, and for that you need community based mechanisms. So it's about seeing what does the situation really need, who's best placed to do this. Does everything need to go to the state? If you and I have a small dispute over a check bouncing case, do we really need to go waste the entire state's time for it, or is there a way we can do that outside, right? So I think it's about asking ourselves that, do we need a one size fits all, or do we need to sort of put the particular kind of grievance or justice issue at the center, say what is the best mechanism for this, and then ask ourselves, how do we make this happen?
Right. No, like you rightly pointed out, it is important that the state, we should not look at this as a binary, but rather, both the state and the community or the private sector filling in different areas which require equal attention, right? But again, like going back to the larger policy question here, and like you said, even I am a lawyer and I was a capital markets lawyer before this. And
Oh,
one of the,
really?
yeah,
Ditto.
yeah, and one of the things, like it's a general observation, was that legal industry, especially when it comes to litigation, is highly resistant to any kind of reforms. There is no FDI, lawyers are not allowed to advertise, foreign firms are not allowed entry, foreign lawyers cannot practice, and so on, right? But we also know at the same time the legal market is super underserviced, right? There is so much shortage of good lawyers, judges, speedy mechanisms of dispute resolution, and so on. So if you want to shine the torch at the traditional, let's call it the traditional legal setup, so what do you think would be the kind of reforms that we deserve today?
What a big question. How many hours do you have? Uh, no, I think
You
there's
can
a
talk about one or two most important ones according to you.
I would say this, right? I think the formal system itself, especially if you look at the litigation, I think there is a lot of possibility there to just leverage what technology enables today. It's sometimes completely right that, even lawyers are resistant to change. But I think sometimes we all have failed to sort of really be able to articulate, how does this better each of our lives, including that of the lawyers who are in some way closing the doors today. I believe there is a lot of opportunity to leverage technology to reimagine processes completely. Litigation, especially, and most court processes, if you see, are designed haven't changed over the last 200 years, right? They were all imagined at pre-digital environment and have remained the same. So, whether you need to go here for a notary, you need this stamp paper here, you go file this here, you come before this person to say this. A lot of this has been sort of designed and not changed for the last 200 years. A key question we can ask is almost like what we've seen happen with the finance industry, right? Like you are no more going and standing in queue to sort of get your money. You have ATMs that have fundamentally changed the process. It's using technology, but not just sort of to automate the existing thing. You're changing it for from a transformative point of view. I'd like to believe there is a huge opportunity to do so in the design of the entire formal court and litigation system. I think there have been signs in the recent past that have helped us move, take baby steps towards it compared to, say, movement over the last 100 years. I'm obviously bullish about it. It's not going to be an easy path, but I think that is the direction we're going to see ourselves going in some way. A lot of concerns to be kept in mind, but I would say that's definitely one. Another area I think that would be really great to see is how we look at capacity itself. Like, what are the skills we're talking about that we need as lawyers? Lawyers are as people who are really trying to prevent, contain, and resolve disputes, right? If you see at the heart of a lawyer's work, that's what you're doing. You're trying to either prevent conflict or disputes from happening. You're trying to contain it before it gets big, or once it happens, to say, how do you get people into the space? And the more you think of it that way, you realize that so much of the focus of the capacity of lawyers has been in only resolving a dispute once it's flared up to be really big. I think the next few years, we have to start playing with our world becoming as complex and interconnected as it is. We have to start focusing as much on conflict prevention and containment. And that requires completely different skills than what most lawyers, especially Shrikrishna, if you've gone, you know that we're not trained to do that. We barely know, we know how to sort of stand up for a client and win no matter what. We don't know collaborative mechanisms. We don't know how to mediate conversations. We don't know what it takes to sort of prevent it from happening. That mindset is really far. And I feel like we could go a long way in making that way more mainstream.
Yeah, Supriya, in fact, if you look at the pandemic phase, right, a lot happened. ODRs came into, I think, the forefront, and there was a spike in how everything went live streaming, even at the court and as well as e-courts and everything, right? So, do you think like there's a lot of conversation about digital will and a lot happening on the tech front? So, has the pandemic taken that spike and now it's on a lull again, or you see that kind of gaining momentum towards the direction of e-courts and other tech interventions?
No, I mean,
And
go ahead.
Sabriya, just add on to Soumya's question, right? The other thing was, since you mentioned that adoption of tech is probably one of the foremost pressing concerns in our formal institutions, and you mentioned fintech, right? And similarly, edtech and medtech, and a lot of these startups have come in, especially private sector offering services which have completely revolutionized those particular sectors. So, what is your outlook on legal tech? Because I know a few friends who work in ODR related legal tech companies, and from their experience, it is picking up. Except we don't see so much. We don't have a legal tech unicorn, right? So, what has been your experience with legal tech so far?
Yeah, no, you're completely right, Samya, to the point that you made. COVID definitely accelerated. I doubt if anybody would disagree with that, because the conversation suddenly in the sector went from not whether we should adopt tech, which was still like because of the kind of mindset that's generally be there to maintain status quo. There used to be a lot of resistance and sort of like, oh, we don't need this really. Why do we kind of a thing to saying how? So it went from a whether we need tech to how do we go about using it, and that itself is a big shift, right? And you saw like a spectrum of things. You saw ODR pick up significantly, way many more companies, lok adalats in the country. Lok adalats are basically the where often smaller cases are disputed, like so whether your accidents, insurance, a lot of smaller financial matters are referred to by the courts, or parties voluntarily go to them to mediate and settle these disputes. Lok Adalat started adopting technology across like several states in the country to sort of mediate these disputes during the pandemic. You also had, like you mentioned, more courts doing hybrid hearing, more courts moving to e-filing of cases, at least in baby steps, starting to put some services here and there in it. I definitely think, of course, it created a significant momentum and moved at a speed over between 2021 and 22. Now, I think people are now figuring really the how to more. So it is, if I just had to say, is it moving in the exact same speed like that? The acceleration we saw then, are we still at the same rate of acceleration? No. But are we still moving? Very much, yes. Right. So because now people have realized, okay, just piecemeal doing a few things here and there, lip service things is not changing things. You need to fundamentally redesign the whole. You can't just say, I'll take this piece of the puzzle and just do video conference hearing, or I'll only do e-filing. You realize you have to build fundamentally integrated solutions and systems that can talk to each other to derive its better benefit. And now people are asking how and where do we go from here. So I think those first few steps were taken, and now it's much more to say, how do we consolidate, how do we evolve from just being a product, because even the legal tech companies are realizing more and more that just products alone are not enough. You have to often have an allied service relating to it to help in adoption. So there have been significant learnings over the last 2 years in terms of trying to get people to adopt, seeing what works, what doesn't. And I think we will see an evolution of also what are the categories evolving. You're completely right. Wills, we are suddenly seeing like 3-4 brilliant startups, starting to really think about how you think, not just look at the legal dimension of it, but connect it to your financial aspect, So very integrated business solutions, if you had to look at it that way, right? How does it connect to your banking, financial system as something that you don't do just sort of one date and time and as a document that's done, but it becomes something that, becomes a part of how you're looking at your own rights and managing. So I think it's very interesting to see a lot of these evolve. There has been a lot more investment in the space. I think one report I was reading, said that we had, I think, close to 1 billion investment in 2021 in legal tech, and people are expecting it to grow. I think this was the Media Network's growth report where they said they're expecting it to grow at a 35% rate. So you have a slew of things happening in legal tech, right? From people looking at particular solutions like online filing, ODR solutions, which is just to say, how do you do mediation online, to help people helping research happen better through law, people trying to do translation of legal texts so that it can be more accessible to different people. So you have the field is fairly wide in that sense, and there is, I think, a lot mushrooming over the last 2-3 years.
Thanks, Supriya. So I think let's stop for a short break here. And when we come back, I believe Sowmya has more questions for you regarding Agami and the work that you do.
So, Supriya, coming to how, community-based organizations, you did touch upon how to an extent they can be involved, but we also see that you have an initiative called Justice Makers, right? Where young people come together to solve justice problems. So a little about that and what worked, what didn't work, and how do you actually manage to keep it going? Because young people also, including us, right? There's a lot of distractions. So how do you manage the whole thing?
Yeah, I think it's for us the part that really excites us the most, right? I think if you ask most of us in the team, what should we drop? If there's one thing we could continue and had to drop everything else, what would it be? And it would be continuing how we work with young people. And I'll tell you why. I think, but to just clarify before I get into that, we don't have an initiative called Justice Makers. We just call anybody who is in the pathway of making justice, sort of like asking themselves a question, right? Like, okay, I've seen a problem, what can I do to it? And any role you play, it could be sometimes volunteering, it could be sometimes as simple as saying, okay, I'll help create an open data set, to sometimes I'm starting an organization. We see it all as the spectrum of justice making, because what we have come to learn is justice making is more or less a skill that is learned, right? Not different from learning to dance, learning to play football, or anything else. It's a muscle we build. The more we do it, the better we get at it. And then the scope of the problems we may choose to address, the role we might choose to assume to play ourselves, keeps growing like in any other skill. So I think that's been our own personal journeys, right? Like none of us, I worked as a capital markets lawyer, like Shrikrishna for a while. And that time, did I know how to go about dealing with these complex problems of saying, okay, where do you begin? If I didn't have a real plan and something concrete, I didn't know how to navigate it. But allowing yourself to find opportunities or pathways to act, make all the difference in both giving you that sense of belief that I can, and also learning the actual skill sets that are needed to be able to do it. Partly it's a mindset, but partly it is learning how to negotiate, learning how to build teams, learning how to sort of, identify opportunities for action. And what we realized more than anything in the last year is we see so much traction and creativity coming from young people. They're not necessarily bound by the same expertise and the experience that sometimes tells us, no, that can't be done. So they're willing to ask different questions. They're willing to try and fail very quickly and very fast. And I think what we have come to learn is our core role is really to create opportunities for action. Our belief genuinely is there are enough people out there, young, old, many young, but of course, even in the other communities, who want to contribute, just don't know how. Nobody knows where to begin. I'm working in this law firm, or I'm studying, third year law school, or I'm a litigating lawyer, or I'm a housewife, right? Whoever you are, you don't know where to begin. It just seems really a little overbearing when you have to sort of think where you have to start. And if all of us can help break that, create, almost like, here is a call to action. Do you want to do this? we find always we have more people raising their hands than we were ready for. I'll give you two examples that sort of illustrate it. When we, more or less 8 months after we started, we ran something called the EADR challenge, where we knew we wanted to find new ways. The problem statement was this, that is there a way for us to solve millions of disputes in a way that is trust based and in a collaborative manner? So if pendency is a big problem before the court, we're always saying, oh, we need more judges, more more courts, etc. But what if we were to solve it by taking a bunch of those cases out of court system using collaborative mechanisms, so not adversarial, a way in which you and I can just mediate and agree upon a solution, like most normal adults would resolve a conflict. Like if a husband and wife had an issue, you're not going to say I'm right, you lost, I won, and that's the way to sort of move forward, right? Like whether it's a banker and a customer who have a conflict, can they get on the same table and find a path forward? And more so, we put it out as a problem statement. How can we do that? How can we do it not for one case, not two cases, because it was happening for one case, two case, but to do it at scale for millions of disputes using technology. And we expected like maybe 5-10 people to raise their hand. We had people applying from around the world. We had over 60 people as collectives, so many of the 60 were groups like which had 5-6 people in, raise their hand in a month. It shocked us because we were also a new organization. We weren't really sure, like, who's going to respond, where people, including from Dubai, Brazil, applied. But equally, students from colleges applied and raised their hand. And the team that actually won that challenge, they were 3 law school students in the final year of their exam. They had been working the last 3 years, moving around, their communities with this beautiful slogan saying "Suljhao magar pyar se," building awareness on mediation as a mechanism for resolving disputes. And they were tinkering with technology. They didn't have, to be honest, like, a complete solution. But the jury placed their bet on them because they saw the commitment and the potential in the team. And today, they are one of the biggest ODR players in the country, right? So that was one way we managed to get, one pathway to action. So you create the opportunity, you create some incentives, you create a framing, you create some supporting structure. It's the role of a gardener, basically. You create the right environment, and the plants, the seeds that are going to be the strongest are going to thrive. Another example is the last year we were working on this Justice Hub open data platform, where we were looking to sort of say, like how you have GitHub, like the inspiration was a lot from GitHub to say, where people are putting their open source codes, etc. into it. What if everybody in the legal and justice community put out their data into a shared space so that each one doesn't have to reinvent the wheel? If you have studied POSCO cases for the last 30 years in particular district, you can put that up so that you may have done it for Delhi. Let me look at it, build upon it for Bombay or whatever, right? And while we had many learnings, failures in that entire process, but there was an opportunity where we felt like many people wanted data sets on judges, like to know who are our judges, what is their background, who becomes a judge in the country. It's such an opaque system. And we thought it'd be really interesting to make that data public. And we partnered with NLU Orissa, Professor Derangin Tripathi, who anchored it for us. And we did the Summer of Data program, where we just asked to say, we want to build this data set. Who wants, this is going to be the role. We're going to have to scrape this data out of like different high court websites and put it together. I'm not kidding. In 2 days, we had over 200 and odd students apply, right, for it. And that number just grew. So what you realize is, what we've learned most is, the more we can think of a call to action, create the right environment for it, people do show up for sure.
Yeah. So going a little deeper into Suljao Magar Pyar Se kind of context, right? In the legal education system, Supriya, do you think that...
Sowmya, sorry to interrupt you, Sowmya, but I think it's worthwhile to mention that we did have Pranjal and Akshetha on this show a couple of weeks back.
Oh, lovely.
They spoke at length about online mediation and the work their startup is doing. Yeah. But sure, Sowmya, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. That is Sama, right?
Yes.
That's correct. I think we can plug that episode to the description of the show so that our interested listeners can hear that one as well.
Yeah. Even the Civis one might be relevant to.
Yes. And all of these are relatively young people, if you see, right? Like some of the boldest creative things comes from there because they don't have the baggage of saying "aisa nahi ho sakta,"
True. Yeah, even Antara says the same, though there are its own challenges. I think the way they've approached it is great, and they're trying to do. whatever it takes. So, in fact, I keep talking to them to get some solutioning for some of the local challenges that I have within the apartment space and the vicinity that I live in. And a lot of times they're able to give me solutions which are feasible. Like, I don't need to go through a tedious thing, but something that's worked in Mumbai can be, like you said, right, a playbook which helps you to kind of adopt it into another setup as well. So that's been great. Yeah. So on the legal education front, we see a lack of market ready legal skills, right? And how has Agami been able to kind of look at outreach with universities, colleges, and see what's going actually well in favor versus what's something that's to be fixed in the academia itself?
So I personally think Agami has still a long way to go in engaging universities. We have done so in an ad hoc way, like I mentioned, when we open these challenges or ways to act. We haven't had like a kind of formal partnership with a university to say do something. We just keep creating these opportunities for action, and you have, like, whether it's for the prize, for a challenge, or for a summary, you do have students applying, and that's as far as we have gone so far. There's a really long way for us to go on that journey. But I do feel you're right in sort of saying this is a space I'd love to see much more happening, in terms of how are people fundamentally rethinking how legal education should be. Some of the things I personally feel would be a great direction to move forward is, the first is not isolating law schools. Somehow, over the last several decades, the entire model of law schools has become very, put them in a far campus, put only the law students with themselves, and leave them there, kind of a thing. You see the entire law school structure that's arrived, right? Like, it's independent law schools. I feel like in the process that it has come at a cost of a truly interdisciplinary approach. Sure, the law schools do teach history and sometimes like other subjects that come from other domains, but you are not, as a student, fundamentally engaging with students from other disciplines, interacting with experiences that are different from yours. So, if I think, like, the equivalent of what would it be to be in a DU where you have different departments there and then you're converging. I think there are some organic synergies that happen there that end up being missing in the model that we have. I think the second thing that I think would be a great thing to move towards is to say, how do we enable law schools to, so some of the systemic problems in the law school that really bother me is, whether we like it or not, subconsciously we're trained to sort of follow the path, right? You're always trained as a lawyer to say, follow the precedent, right? Like, what happened before, build your case based on finding things that have happened exactly like this before, and the person who more or less is able to keep up to precedent wins, right? And I think when you want to build a new future, sometimes you have to envision something new, and that skill of imagining a new possibility is not something that we're really taught. Implicitly, we're taught much more to look historically backwards. That has its advantages, but I'm just saying I wish it could be balanced by the ability to imagine, envision, as much as you sort of are learning from history. And again, I think another is spaces in law schools for us to be able to take more risks. The general field of law is, even if you're representing a client, to minimize risk. Like, no, this is too risky. No, we should put this in the contract. Everything is to sort of minimize risk, but there are really going to be no rewards if you don't take some risks, right? In terms of trying something new, improving a system. And there will be those failures, but what are those mechanisms? Some engineering colleges have created those spaces for people to experiment, try. Like, you have these entrepreneurial clubs, you have different things that are happening. And I think spaces to build that muscle to take risks, imagine the future, would be really great. Apart from that point I mentioned before, which is on a way for us to think about the skill not just being the adversarial skill, but also a skill that can really look at preventing and containing disputes in a way that you use other resolution mechanisms that maintain relationships without breaking them, I think are going to become more and more important. So that's more like my wish list. We would love to see ourselves also chipping away at some of that going forward. I think small steps are being taken, but yeah, a long way to go there.
No, I don't know why you mentioned that Agami has not done enough outreach, because at least, when I was in law school, Agami was almost a household name or a hostel name. And
But
when data for just
no idea.
came out, and like so many students were lining up to sign up, right? And there was a lot of excitement around it. But yeah, on a serious note, yes. But regardless of the law school institutional structures, I am also very hopeful for the bright young minds which are coming out, every year. And these people are more risk taking, I believe. I think especially after the pandemic, I think there's some change. and many are not opting for the traditional path like you mentioned, and are trying to do something different, try and experiment.
Yeah, and we are seeing a birth of also some younger professors, relatively younger, who are trying completely new things. I think I'm very inspired by the work that Project 39 is doing in NLU Delhi. NLSIU has also a couple of really cool centers where the professors are not keeping it to like purely just the academic. Like, they're creating their action practice in a way the students are getting real lived experience, solving real problems and not just sort of like researching about them. So I think there is pockets of really good stuff happening.
Yeah, that's it, I think, Shri. Anything else that you have to ask?
No, Swami, I think you have asked a lot of questions, touched upon a lot of
Yeah.
different themes, I believe, and also with legal education, it's a can of worms. So
Yeah.
I think we should close here. So thank you
Yes.
so much, Supriya, for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And
Supriya.
anyone listening, if you have an idea or excited in some way to start making your own journey here, please feel free to reach out to us. We're dying to get to know you.
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks, Supriya. Thank you, Sowmya.
Thanks. Thanks, Shri.
Bye.
Supriya. Bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.